The men who burned Ghanaian tomato traders alive thought they would disappear into the desert. Within days, Ibrahim Traoré personally led the hunt, tracked them down, captured them alive, and brought them before a military court. There was no long delay, no waiting, no hiding behind speeches. Justice moved quickly. Inside a closed-door courtroom, the first hearing began. Chains clinked, confessions started, and the truth behind the attack began to unfold. Stay until the very end, because this is the story of swift justice, powerful revelations, and a moment that changed the fight for Africa's future. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, the kind that feels heavy, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Chains clinked, boots echoed on the marble floor, and when the doors opened, every soldier stood straighter, because Captain Ibrahim Traoré had entered. 3 days earlier, the town of Titao in northern Burkina Faso had burned. Trucks carrying tomatoes and onions were turned into ashes. Shops were looted, telephone lines cut. Gunshots tore through the afternoon heat. Among the dead were Ghanaian traders, fathers, brothers, sons, 7 of them burnt beyond recognition. The killers claimed they were soldiers of JNIM, the Al-Qaeda-linked militant group spreading terror across the Sahel. They thought it would be another attack. Another statistic. Another headline. They were wrong. When the news reached Ouagadougou, witnesses say President Traoré did not speak for a long time. He stood by the window of his office, looking north. "Ghana is our brother," he finally said quietly. "Burkina Faso is their home too." Those who were in the room say his voice was calm, too calm. That same night, something unusual happened. There was no long meeting, no endless paperwork, no waiting for foreign approval. Instead, military helicopters were prepared before dawn, and at 4:12 a.m., Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the tarmac in full combat uniform. He was not wearing a presidential sash. He was wearing a rifle. An officer tried to protest. "Mr. President, it is dangerous." Traoré looked at him. "They burnt traitors alive," he said. "I will not command from a desk." And with that, the helicopters lifted into the dark sky. For 6 days, there was silence. No public statements. No press conferences. Rumors spread across West Africa. Some said he was negotiating. Others said he was preparing a major strike. But what few knew was that Traoré was in the northern bush himself, walking through dust and thorn trees, sleeping on the ground with his soldiers. He listened to mothers who had lost sons. He visited the place where the tomato truck had burned. The metal frame was twisted. Charred sacks lay scattered. The smell of smoke still lingered. An elderly woman touched the ashes and wept. Traoré knelt beside her. "They came to trade food," she cried. "Food, not war." His jaw tightened. "No more," he said softly. "No more African blood for foreign games." The hunt began that same night. Drones moved above the desert. Special units advanced quietly through dry riverbeds. Villagers whispered locations, and before sunrise on the 7th day, gunfire cracked through the silence of a hidden camp. The militants were not expecting the president of Burkina Faso to be leading the assault, but he was there. Witnesses say he stood behind armored vehicles, directing troops with sharp hand signals. When one militant tried to escape through the scrub, Traoré's convoy cut him off. By midday, several suspects were captured alive. Alive. That was important, because this time, it would not just be bullets. It would be justice. Now, inside the military court in Ouagadougou, those same men sat in chains. Their clothes were dusty. Their faces no longer carried arrogance, only fear. The first hearing had begun. Not televised, not open to cameras, closed doors, military court, controlled. The trial would continue in silence, but history had already been made. The men who burned traitors alive would answer. Quickly, Traoré had made sure of that. He stood before the judges. Behind him, families of victims sat quietly. Some of the Ghanaian women who survived were present. They had been asked to witness, to document, to see that justice was not just promised but happening. Traoré spoke. "We will not allow Burkina Faso to become a playground for terror." His voice filled the room. "And we will not allow those who come from outside to turn Africans against each other." He paused. His eyes scanned the accused men. "You spilled the blood of traitors. Men who carried tomatoes, not weapons. The chains rattled again. One of the militants shifted nervously. The judge called the first defendant to speak, and when he finally opened his mouth, his voice trembled. What he was about to say would shock the entire room. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered. Word had spread that the president had personally led the capture. That compensation would be given to the families. That Ghanaian lives mattered as much as Burkina Faso lives. Some people cried openly. Others stood in silent pride. Because for the first time in years, terror did not feel unstoppable. It felt cornered. Inside, the first confession began. And the story was far bigger than Titao, far bigger than tomatoes, far bigger than one attack. The judge leaned forward. "Tell this court who sent you." The room held its breath, and the man began to speak. The man's hands trembled. The chains around his wrists scraped against the wooden table. Sweat rolled down his temple. The military courtroom in Ouagadougou was sealed tight. No cameras, no journalists, no phones allowed. Only judges, military officials, survivors, and the families of the dead. And at the front of the room, President Ibrahim Traoré watched without blinking. "Speak!" the judge ordered. The militant swallowed. We did not come alone." A murmur moved through the room. He continued, voice cracking. "We were trained outside Africa, in camps in the Middle East. We were sent here." The words fell like stones. "Sent by who?" the judge demanded. The man hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Traoré. But Traoré did not move. His expression was firm, calm, unshaken. "We were told," the militant said slowly, "that Africa must never unite. That instability keeps power in the right hands. We were promised money, weapons, protection." Gasps filled the courtroom. One of the Ghanaian women covered her mouth with her hand. Another militant suddenly shouted, unable to stay silent. "It is true," he cried. "We were told to burn trade routes, to make borders unsafe, to create fear between Burkina Faso and Ghana. Between brothers." A soldier stepped forward, but the judge raised his hand. "Let him speak." The second militant's voice grew louder. "They told us if trade continues, if cooperation grows, the region becomes strong. So we were sent to break it." The courtroom felt smaller, hotter. President Traoré finally stepped forward. "You burned food trucks," he said, his voice steady but heavy with anger. "You killed men who woke up at dawn to feed families. You thought that would break us?" The militant looked down. "We were told Africa is weak," he whispered. Traoré's voice rose, echoing off the walls. "Africa is not weak." He turned toward the families. "Those men you killed were not just Ghanaian traitors. They were African builders. They carried food across borders. They carried unity." He faced the accused again. "And you came to spill blood on our soil." Silence. Then came the most chilling confession. The first militant lifted his head. "We were told specifically to attack the tomato truck. We were told it would send a message." A Ghanaian survivor burst into tears. "That truck carried my husband," she cried. "He only sold vegetables." The accused man's voice broke. "We poured fuel. We locked the doors. We were ordered not to let anyone escape." The room exploded in grief. One soldier clenched his fists so tight his knuckles turned white. Traoré closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, they were different, colder, determined. "Your orders do not excuse you," he said. "You chose to obey evil." The judge called for order. The hearing continued. Documents were presented. Communication devices seized from the militants were displayed. Evidence of foreign contacts, funding routes, encrypted messages. The plot was bigger than a single attack. It was a strategy. Destabilize the Sahel, divide neighbors, stop trade, spread fear. But something had gone wrong. They had not expected a president to walk into the battlefield himself. They had not expected a trial this fast. They had not expected to be alive facing justice. Outside the court, word of the confessions began to leak. People gathered in the streets of Ouagadougou, in Accra, in villages near the Ghana-Burkina border. For once, the story was not about terrorists winning. It was about accountability. Inside the courtroom, President Traoré made a promise. "To the families of the Ghanaian traitors," he said, turning toward them, "your pain is our pain." His voice softened. "Burkina Faso will compensate you. not because money replaces life, but because we stand together. Ghana's tears are Burkina Faso's tears. A Ghanaian elder stood up slowly. "You feel our pain?" he asked. Traoré stepped down from the front and walked closer to him. "I do," he replied quietly, "because the blood spilled was African blood." The elder nodded, tears falling freely. "For years," Traoré continued, addressing the court, "we have been told we are too divided, too poor, too weak." He paused. "But today, we prove something different." He turned back toward the militants. "No more. Africa's blood will not be spilled for foreign games. Not in Burkina Faso, not in Ghana, not anywhere." The judge announced that the trial would continue behind closed doors under military authority. The charges were severe: terrorism, murder, arson, conspiracy to destabilize the state. The accused would remain detained, and the hearings would move swiftly. As soldiers escorted the militants away, one of them broke down completely. "We were used!" he shouted. "We were lied to!" Traoré did not look back. "Justice does not depend on your regret," he said calmly. The doors shut. The first day of the trial ended, but the fire it lit across West Africa had only just begun. That night, President Traoré addressed the nation. No shouting, no theatrics, just a simple message. "We are not enemies across borders. We are one people, and anyone who comes to break that unity will face justice." In homes across Ghana and Burkina Faso, families listened in silence. For the first time since the attack, hope began to return. But inside the military detention facility, the accused men knew something else. Their confessions had opened doors, and more names were about to surface. The network was bigger, and the hunt was not over. The night after the first hearing, the air in Ouagadougou felt different. Heavy, charged. Inside the military detention facility, the accused men sat in separate cells. No talking, no contact, just concrete walls and the echo of their own breathing. For the first time since they crossed into Burkina Faso, they were alone with their thoughts. And fear. The second closed-door hearing began before sunrise. No cameras, no journalists, only military judges, intelligence officers, and a small group of authorized witnesses. President Ibrahim Traoré entered quietly this time. Not in combat uniform, not in ceremonial dress. Simple, focused, determined. The judge wasted no time. "Continue your testimony," he ordered the first accused. The man's eyes were red. He had not slept. "There are others," he said immediately. "Cells across the region. In Mali, in Niger, near the Ghana border." A sharp silence filled the room. "Names," the judge demanded. The militant hesitated. A military officer placed a file on the table. "Photos, maps, communication logs." "We already know more than you think," the officer said calmly. The militant's shoulders dropped. "They recruited us through networks in the Middle East," he confessed. "We were promised payment in dollars. We were told Africa's governments are fragile, that leaders would hesitate, that fear would protect us." He looked up slowly. "We were wrong." Another accused was brought forward, younger, barely more than a boy. His voice shook as he spoke. "They told us to target food supply routes," he said. "Tomatoes, onions, livestock transport. If food becomes scarce, people turn against their leaders." One of the Ghanaian women clenched her fists. "So my husband was just a strategy to you?" she asked, her voice breaking. The young militant began to cry. "They said trade unity between Ghana and Burkina Faso is dangerous, that if neighbors trust each other, they become harder to control." President Traoré leaned forward. "And who fears African unity?" he asked quietly. The young man whispered a name, then another. Foreign handlers, coordinators, financiers. The courtroom felt like it had shifted. This was no longer just about gunmen in the bush. This was about a system, a design, a long game meant to keep Africa unstable. Traoré stood slowly. "When I went north last week," he began, his voice steady, "I saw the burnt truck myself." He paused. "I saw tomatoes melted into blackened metal. I saw shoes that never made it home." His jaw tightened. "I felt shame that this happened on our soil." He turned toward the accused. "But I also felt something else." He placed his hand on the table. "Resolve." His voice grew stronger. "We will hunt every network, every recruiter, every financier who believes African lives are cheap. The room was silent except for the sound of pens writing. The court then played audio recovered from seized devices. Voices speaking in coded language. Instructions. Payments. Orders to increase pressure along trade corridors. Orders to ignite border tension. One message stood out. Make it painful. Make it visible. The Ghanaian survivors closed their eyes. The pain had been visible. Very visible. By midday, more confessions followed. The accused admitted they were instructed to avoid attacking foreign companies directly. Why? The judge asked sharply. Because that brings global attention, one militant replied. But African traders, they said it would only cause local grief. A low wave of anger moved through the courtroom. Traoré's voice cut through it. They miscalculated. He looked at the judges. They thought we would mourn quietly. They thought borders would divide us. He turned toward the Ghanaian families again. But Ghana did not stay silent. And neither did we. Outside the courthouse, people gathered again. Some carried Ghanaian flags. Others carried Burkina Faso flags. They stood side by side. No speeches, just presence. An old man was heard saying, "This is not just Burkina's fight. This is Africa's fight." The phrase began to spread. Across radio stations. Across markets. Across WhatsApp groups. Africa's fight. Back inside, the judge announced that additional suspects had been detained overnight based on the names provided. The network was already unraveling. The speed shocked many. There had been no long delays. No endless investigations dragging for years. Traoré had moved quickly. Some called it bold. Others called it risky. But no one could call it passive. As the hearing ended, one of the accused asked to speak again. "I was told President Traoré would hide," he said quietly. "We were told he would blame others." He looked up. "You came for us yourself." Traoré's response was simple. When leaders hide, nations bleed. The soldier escorting the militant paused for a second. Even he felt the weight of those words. That evening, Traoré met privately with the Ghanaian delegation. No cameras, no publicity. He told them compensation funds were already being arranged. Medical care for survivors. Support for children left without fathers. And safe escorted routes would be established for future traders. "We will not let fear close our roads," he said. One Ghanaian official nodded. "You acted faster than anyone expected." Traoré replied quietly, "Pain should never wait." But as night fell, intelligence reports arrived with new warnings. Some of the foreign handlers had gone silent, which meant only one thing. They knew the network was exposed, and desperate networks can be dangerous. Inside the military compound, security doubled. Patrols intensified, because justice had begun. But the storm was not fully over. And in the shadows beyond Burkina Faso's borders, powerful people were watching closely.